I clutched the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white as I pressed it against my ear. The cheerful chatter of party guests in the next room faded away, replaced by the thundering of my own heartbeat. "I can't wait to see you again, darling," Richard's voice purred through the receiver. "Maggie thinks I'm working late tonight. We'll have the whole evening to ourselves." My stomach lurched. 40 years of marriage, and this is how I find out? On the day of his retirement party, no less. I wanted to scream, to burst into the living room and confront him in front of everyone. But I held my tongue, listening as he made plans with his mistress. When he hung up, I took a deep breath and smoothed my dress. The party guests were waiting, blissfully unaware of the bomb that had just detonated in my world. I plastered on a smile and stepped into the room, my eyes immediately finding Richard. He beamed at me from across the room, raising his glass in a toast. "There's my beautiful wife," he called out. "The woman who stood by me all these years." The irony was bitter on my tongue as I forced myself to smile back. Our son David approached, giving me a quick hug. "Great party, Mom," he said. "Dad looks so happy." If only he knew. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I watched Richard work the room, laughing and joking with our friends and family, a cold determination settled in my chest. He thought he could have it all, his devoted wife, his adoring family, and his young mistress on the side. Well, Richard was about to learn that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, especially when that woman is me, Maggie Thompson. And I wasn't about to let 40 years of marriage go up in flames without a fight. I raised my glass, catching Richard's eye across the room. "A toast," I called out, my voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath the surface. "To new beginnings." Richard's smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Good. Let him wonder what I know. The game was about to change, and I intended to win. The morning after Richard's retirement party, I found myself sitting across from Charlotte at our favorite cafe. My hands trembled as I clutched my coffee mug, the bitter taste matching my mood. "He admitted it, Charlotte," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Right there in our bedroom, with the sounds of the party still echoing downstairs. "He told me he's in love with her." Charlotte's eyes widened. "Oh, Maggie, I'm so sorry." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "What are you going to do?" I shook my head, fighting back tears. "I don't know. 40 years, Charlotte. How do I just throw that away?" "You're not the one throwing it away," she reminded me gently. "Richard made that choice." As we talked, I felt a small spark of anger ignite within me. It grew with each word, each sympathetic look from my friend. By the time we finished our coffee, that spark had become a roaring flame. "I need to tell David," I said suddenly, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. Charlotte hesitated. "Are you sure? That's going to open up a whole new can of worms." "I know," I sighed. "But he deserves to know the truth about his father. And I need him, Charlotte. I can't face this alone." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from David. "Hey Mom, everything okay? You seemed off at the party last night." I showed Charlotte the message, my heart racing. "It's like he knows something's wrong." "Maybe that's a sign," Charlotte said softly. "Go to him, Maggie. Let your son support you." I nodded, gathering my courage. As I stood to leave, Charlotte pulled me into a tight hug. "Remember," she whispered, "you're stronger than you think." With those words ringing in my ears, I headed to David and Olivia's house. Each step felt like I was marching towards a battlefield, but I knew I couldn't turn back now. My son deserved the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. As I rang their doorbell, I took a deep breath. The door swung open, revealing David's smiling face.
"Mom."
What a nice surprise. Looking into his eyes, so much like his father's, I felt my resolve waver. But then I remembered Richard's betrayal, the casual way he dismissed our marriage. I straightened my shoulders and met David's gaze. "We need to talk, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "It's about your father." I sat on David and Olivia's couch, my hands clasped tightly in my lap as I watched the emotions play across my son's face. Shock, disbelief, and then a rage I'd never seen before. "How could he do this to you, Mom?" David's voice was low, dangerous. "After everything you've done for him, for our family?" I reached out to touch his arm, but he jerked away, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "I'm going to confront him," he declared. "David, please," I started, but he was already grabbing his keys.
No, Mom.
"He doesn't get to just walk away from this." Before I could stop him, he was out the door. I turned to Olivia, who had been silent throughout my revelation. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean to cause all this trouble." She gave me a sad smile. "It's not your fault, Maggie. You're not the one who cheated." We sat in tense silence for what felt like hours. When the front door finally slammed open, I jumped to my feet. David stormed in, his face flushed with anger. He admitted it, he spat. Said he was in love with her. Can you believe that? My heart sank. "What happened, David?" "We fought. I've never been so angry at him before." He ran a hand through his hair, his voice breaking. "He tried to justify it, Mom. Said he deserved some happiness in his retirement. As if you haven't made him happy all these years." Olivia moved to comfort him, but he shrugged her off. "I told him he was dead to me if he didn't end it. That he'd lose his entire family over this fling." I felt a mix of gratitude and guilt wash over me. "Oh, David, you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he insisted. "You're my mother. I won't let him treat you like this." As the night wore on, I watched the toll this revelation was taking on David and Olivia. They spoke in hushed tones, tension evident in every gesture. When I announced I was leaving, David insisted on driving me home. The car ride was silent, heavy with unspoken words. As we pulled up to my house, the house Richard and I had shared for decades, David finally spoke. "Mom, I want you to know, whatever you decide to do, I'm here for you. If you want to leave him, Olivia and I will support you completely." I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart." As I walked to my front door, I saw Richard watching from the window. The look on his face, a mixture of guilt, defiance, and fear, made my stomach churn. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. But I wasn't prepared for the words that greeted me. "I'm not ending it, Maggie," Richard said, his voice cold. "I love you both, and I won't choose." In that moment, I realized this battle was far from over, and I would need every ounce of strength to fight for my family and my dignity. I never imagined I'd be sitting in David and Olivia's living room, feeling like an intruder in my own family. But here I was, watching the chaos unfold as Olivia's parents, Helen and George, railed against Richard's infidelity. "This is unacceptable." Helen's shrill voice cut through the air. "How can you stay in this toxic environment, Olivia? Think of Ella." I winced, feeling the weight of guilt press down on me. My granddaughter was upstairs, blissfully unaware of the turmoil below. David paced the room, his face a storm of emotions. "Mom's the victim here," he snapped. "We're not going anywhere." Olivia stood silently by the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The strain was evident in the tightness of her shoulders, the worry lines creasing her forehead. George, usually the calm one, spoke up. Perhaps it would be best if you and Olivia considered a fresh start elsewhere. Away from all this drama." The room fell silent. I felt my heart drop to my stomach. Leave? They couldn't leave. They were all I had left. David's eyes flashed with anger. "You want us to abandon Mom when she needs us most?" "We're thinking of our daughter and granddaughter," Helen retorted. "This situation is toxic for everyone involved." I couldn't bear it anymore. I stood up, my voice shaking but determined. "Please stop. I never meant for any of this to happen. I don't want to be the reason your family falls apart." Olivia turned to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Maggie, you're not. It's just..." But before she could finish, little Ella's voice drifted down from upstairs. "Mommy? Why is everyone yelling?" The tension in the room shifted instantly. Olivia rushed upstairs, leaving the rest of us in uncomfortable silence. When she returned, Ella in her arms, her face was set with resolve. "We're not going anywhere," she said firmly, looking directly at her parents. "Maggie needs us and we're a family. We'll get through this together." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Helen's next words sent a chill down my spine. "Fine. If you won't leave, then we'll take matters into our own hands. We're going to have a little chat with Richard ourselves." As they stormed out, I realized with growing dread that this situation was spiraling out of control. I had to do something, and fast, before my entire family was torn apart. Looking at David and Olivia's worried faces, I made a decision. It was time to confront Richard's mistress directly. I wouldn't let her destroy everything I held dear. "I need to end this," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "And I know exactly how to do it." I never thought I'd find myself rifling through Richard's belongings like a common thief, but desperate times called for desperate measures. My hands trembled as I sifted through his desk drawer, searching for any clue about his mistress. "Come on, Richard," I muttered. "You must have slipped up somewhere." As if answering my plea, my fingers brushed against a small, unfamiliar notebook. I pulled it out, my heart racing as I flipped it open. There, in Richard's neat handwriting, were dates, times, and financial transactions. My blood ran cold as I scanned the pages. These weren't just meeting times. They were records of money transfers. Large sums, far more than Richard should have been spending on dinners or gifts. "Oh, Richard," I whispered, a mix of anger and pity washing over me. "What have you gotten yourself into?" Just then, I heard the front door open. Panic seized me as I quickly shoved the notebook into my pocket and tried to arrange the desk as I'd found it. "Maggie," Richard's voice called out. "Are you home?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. It was now or never. "In here," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Richard appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion and guilt. "What are you doing in my office?" I held up the notebook, watching as the color drained from his face. "I think we need to talk about your retirement fund, Richard." His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with anger. "You had no right to go through my things. And you had no right to betray our marriage." I shot back, surprising myself with my vehemence. "Who is she, Richard? And why are you giving her so much money?" He deflated, sinking into a nearby chair. "It's not what you think, Maggie. I got involved in something. An investment opportunity. It was supposed to set us up for life, but..." As Richard spun his tale of get-rich-quick schemes and manipulation, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at his foolishness, pity for his desperation, and a growing resolve to put an end to this madness. "Enough," I said, cutting him off mid-sentence. "I'm going to meet this woman myself." Richard's head snapped up, panic in his eyes. "Maggie, no. You don't understand. She's dangerous." But I was beyond listening. I'd spent weeks feeling helpless, watching my family crumble around me. Now, armed with this new information, I finally had the power to do something. "I'm ending this, Richard," I said, my voice firm. "One way or another." As I walked out of the room, leaving Richard calling after me, I felt a surge of determination. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for certain. This woman had messed with the wrong family. It was time to fight fire with fire. My heart pounded as I stood outside the sleek downtown office building. This was it, the moment I'd confront the woman who'd torn my family apart. I clutched Richard's notebook in my hand, a damning record of his financial indiscretions. Taking a deep breath, I pushed through the revolving door. The receptionist eyed me suspiciously as I approached. "I'm here to see Veronica Reeves," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Moments later, I was ushered into a plush office. Veronica stood behind her desk, all sleek lines and predatory grace. She couldn't have been more than 35. "Mrs. Thompson," she purred. "What an unexpected pleasure." I cut straight to the chase. "I know what you've been doing, Veronica. The affair, the money, all of it." Her smile never wavered. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." I slammed the notebook on her desk. "Don't play games with me. You've been bleeding my husband dry." For a moment, her mask slipped. I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes before she regained her composure. "Richard's investments were his choice," she said smoothly. "I merely provided opportunities." "Opportunities?" I scoffed. "You manipulated a vulnerable man. destroying his family in the process. She leaned forward, her voice low and dangerous. "Listen, you old fool." Richard came to me. He was bored, desperate for excitement. "I gave him what you couldn't." Her words stung, but I held my ground. "And the money? Was that just a bonus?" "Business is business," she shrugged. "If Richard was stupid enough to fall for it, that's hardly my fault." Rage boiled inside me. I opened my mouth to retort when the office door burst open. Richard stood there, his face a mix of shock and shame. "Maggie," he gasped. "What are you doing here?" Veronica's eyes darted between us, her composure cracking. "Richard, darling, I can explain dash." But Richard wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on me, filled with a dawning horror as he realized the full extent of his mistakes. "I heard everything," he said quietly. "God, Maggie, I'm so sorry. I've been such a fool." In that moment, seeing Richard's broken expression, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. We'd won in a way. The truth was out. But at what cost? As Veronica launched into a desperate explanation, I turned to Richard. "It's time to go home," I said softly. "We have a lot to talk about." Walking out of that office, Richard's hand tentatively reaching for mine, I realized this was far from over. We'd weathered the storm, but the real work of rebuilding our family was just beginning, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength left to do it. The drive home from Veronica's office was painfully silent. Richard's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his face a mask of shame and regret. I stared out the window, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. As we pulled into our driveway, I saw David's car parked out front. My heart sank. This wasn't how I wanted him to find out the truth. "We need to talk to him," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Richard nodded, his shoulders slumped in defeat. We found David pacing in the living room, his face etched with worry. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Olivia's parents called, saying something about confronting Dad's mistress. The word hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "It's over, David," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Your father's affair, the financial manipulation, all of it." David's eyes widened, darting between Richard and me. "Financial manipulation? What are you talking about?" As we explained everything, the affair, the money, my confrontation with Veronica, I watched the emotions play across my son's face. Shock gave way to anger, then a deep, profound disappointment. "How could you, Dad?" he finally said, his voice breaking. "After everything Mom's done for you, for our family?" Richard couldn't meet his eyes. "I was a fool, son. I got caught up in the excitement, the flattery. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did. I cut in, my patience wearing thin. And now we have to decide where we go from here." I turned to Richard, my heart heavy but my resolve firm. "I need you to make a choice, Richard. Right here, right now. Either you commit to rebuilding this family, to earning back our trust, or you walk out that door and don't come back." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the conflict in Richard's eyes, the pull between his misguided infatuation and the reality of what he stood to lose. David stepped forward, his voice low and intense. "Think carefully, Dad. This isn't just about you and Mom anymore. It's about Olivia, about Ella. About the kind of grandfather and father you want to be." I held my breath, feeling as though my entire world hung in the balance of Richard's next words. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime of memories. Would it all crumble in this moment? Richard looked at me, then at David, his eyes brimming with tears. "I want to stay," he whispered. "God help me. I want to make this right." Relief flooded through me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the hardest part was yet to come. Trust, once broken, isn't easily mended. As David pulled out his phone to call Olivia, I turned to Richard. "This is your last chance," I said, my voice firm. "Don't make me regret giving it to you." He nodded, reaching for my hand. I let him take it, feeling the weight of our shared history and the uncertainty of our future. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had weathered the storm. Now it was time to rebuild. 6 months had passed since that fateful confrontation in Veronica's office. I stood in David and Olivia's kitchen, watching Ella play in the backyard, her laughter a balm to my weary soul. "Mom." David's voice pulled me from my reverie. "Dad's here." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was the moment we'd all been working towards, our first family dinner since the separation. Richard entered, looking older and more subdued than I'd ever seen him. His eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Maggie," he said softly, "thank you for agreeing to this." I nodded, not quite ready to offer more. The past months had been a whirlwind of therapy sessions, both individual and couples, as we tried to rebuild what had been broken. Living with David and Olivia had given me the space I needed to heal, to rediscover who I was outside of being Richard's wife. As we sat down to dinner, the tension was palpable. Olivia, bless her, tried to keep the conversation flowing, but there were too many unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally, during dessert, Richard cleared his throat. I want you all to know how deeply sorry I am," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "What I did was unforgivable, and I know I can never fully make up for the pain I've caused." I watched as David's jaw clenched, saw the conflict in his eyes. But then Ella climbed into Richard's lap, oblivious to the tension, and something in the room shifted. "Grandpa, will you push me on the swing later?" she asked innocently. Richard's eyes filled with tears as he hugged her close. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to." In that moment, watching my husband, the man I'd loved for over 4 decades, with our granddaughter, I felt something inside me soften. The anger and hurt were still there, but alongside them was a glimmer of something else. Hope, perhaps, or the recognition that love, in all its messy complexity, was worth fighting for. As the evening wound down, Richard pulled me aside. "Maggie, I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think you might be ready to come home?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. I saw the regret, the love, the desperate desire to make things right. "Not yet," I said gently, "but I think I'm ready to start having dinner together more often, to see where this goes." The relief on his face was palpable. As he left, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead would still be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hope for our future. I turned back to the house, to the warmth of my family. Whatever came next, I knew I had the strength to face it. After all, I was Maggie Thompson, and I had survived the storm.